let me jump back over here to Visual Studio Code, and I want to open up an existing web part project. So this is a web part project that you see right here. And that text is a little small. Let's make this a little bit bigger so you can see that. Again, sorry for the last minute of trying to resize stuff as I just, with that little bit of issue getting started here. So here's what our SharePoint framework project looks like. All that stuff that it downloaded that it needed for our project to run, that's all defined in the package.json file, the same way it is with all other node-based projects. And it just downloaded all the stuff that you see highlighted from the dependencies and dev dependencies section into the node modules folder. That's what all that stuff is installing after I created the project. But if I look at my web part here, what my code looks like, I have a folder here under source called web parts slash, actually, I don't want to use this project here. Let's use a simpler one. Let me back up a little bit, just to this guy. I'm just showing you a project here from my, there we go, from my course on the SharePoint framework. So here I have a web part, and it's called the NASA Apollo Mission Viewer. I'm a bit of a space nut living about an hour north of the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral in Florida. So here's what a web part looks like. Let me go ahead and let me hide the navigation on the left. If I scroll down here, let's just look at what are we really interested in? How hard is this? Well, you're going to define a class. So there's our class of our NASA Apollo Mission Viewer web part, and it's extending an abstract class called the base client-side web part. I've also defined a public signature for this that's listed right here on this interface on the very end. Now, what this is doing is it's saying these are the public properties that you can set on the web part. So usually when I go put a web part into edit mode, I'll have a little property pane that shows up on the right-hand side. Apologies for not being able to show this to you in my chaos of getting set up for this at the last minute due to internet issues. But if you can just kind of visualize this, you can if you put a web part into edit mode, you'd have like this little edit panel on the right-hand side. If I scroll down a little bit farther here, you'll see that I have this render method. So how does this work? What's happening is that when we add a web part to a page, what the SharePoint Online or SharePoint Runtime is doing is it's adding a div, an HTML div element to the page where our web part is going to be rendered. When our web part code runs, it's going to call the render method. The SharePoint framework is going to call the render method on the web part, and that's going to can use a reference to the div that has been added to the page as the DOM element. Then I can set the inner HTML property of that element to just be the following HTML. And that's how we're going to render out our web part. And here I'm just doing some stuff where I've got like an H2 and another div, and then I've created this div with this class called Apollo Mission Details, where I'm then getting a reference to that element. And then what I'm doing is finding which mission that you selected. So once I know which mission you've selected, I'm then going to render out those details into this mission element with the selected mission. And this selected mission right here is a type of iMission. The way I got this was, if I scroll down a bit farther, kind of like you would do in a class constructor, I'm using the onInit method. Think of this like the onLoad event for a page, a web page. So the onInit method is going to be called by the SharePoint framework after the SharePoint framework has initialized on the page. And that is going to allow us to then go do some initialization stuff, like call get selected mission, which if I scroll down a little bit, I think I've got my method down here. There we go. Get selected mission is going through and fetching a mission from our mission service, which is using some API to go grab some data from either a list or a REST API or some other source of data. Now, the last thing that I wanted to show you here is this concept of this get property pane configuration. Remember I talked about earlier where you could go modify the changes that you want to make to a web part. When the normal SharePoint page renders, you'd see the web part in edit mode on the right-hand side. We can control what shows up over there using this get property pane configuration. This is going to return an interface that has a series of pages where I can toggle left and right through the different pages of on the right-hand side. I could jump left and right between different pages of configuration settings. Each page has a header. It then has groups And then inside those groups, each group can have a name of controls. And here's where I'm adding in a couple different controls. This control, a text box, is going to map to the description property on our web part. And here I've just defined a label for it to say, what is that item? This strings thing you see right here, this is a localization thing that we have in the SharePoint framework to be able to localize our solutions very easily, so that right here, like I've got the English version of all those strings. And if I wanted to translate that, I could create a copy of this and define the ES-ES, the Spanish version, by just modifying the value of all of these. And the SharePoint framework will be smart enough to detect what the current user's browser has defined as their preferred language. Okay, that's what a web part is. One more thing, actually, I told you I would show you how to make this work inside of as a web part or in Teams or as a single page app. That is all defined right here in supported hosts. This option right here, you just define things in the array of what's supported. In this case, it supports all of them. Can this work as a web part? Absolutely. Can it be used as a tab in a personal app in Teams? Yes, it can. Can it be used as a tab in a channel or in a group chat? Yes, it can, because it says Teams tab. Can it be used as a single page app? Well, the SharePoint team is a little funny, like the rest of Microsoft 365, and they come up with unique names for things that we already know. They call a single page app a SharePoint full page app, or just SharePoint full page. But everybody that's watching this webinar, all of you are probably very smart, and you know that this is not SharePoint full page. That really stands for single page application, or a SPA, like a React app or an Angular app or something like that. It's just that the only thing that's different about it when it's rendered out as a SharePoint full page is, if I go back to my render method, this DOM element is the only div that's on the page that can contain web parts. And so it will contain a single web part, our web part, which is then treated as a single page app.